Tov. Today's Daf Yomi. The fourth day of Hanukkah is Bava Kamma Daf Lamates. Should be a Shmira, Yeshua, Geula, Atzoa for all of Am Yisrael, especially for the Shvuyim. So Shor Shal Pikeach. Let's say I have an ox. The Pikeach is somebody who's a bardas. He's somebody who's of sound mind. And his ox Shenagach Shor Shal Charashot V'Katan. And his ox scored a person who was a deaf mute or insane or a minor who's not of sound mind. So in all these cases, we're going to say chayev, he has to pay the damages. But if it will be shalchar shot v'katan shenagach shor shel pikeach, if it was the ox of a chereshot v'katan who gores an ox of a pikeach, being the person whose ox was not of sound mind, he's going to be exempt. He's going to be pater. We'll just read Rashi here. Rashi says shor shachar shot v'katan shenaga b'an l'shor shel pikeach is pater. The Gemara is going to explain that the reason is, says Rashi, the reason is we don't appoint an executor for an animal that hasn't gored before. An executor or a guardian is appointed for a person who doesn't have a sound mind to collect from the goof, because the tam is collected from the body, so it's metaltalin. But by muad, but if the animal be a muad, then we would appoint an executor. Because there, it's collected not from the metaltal and from the movables, but from the real estate. So that's how Rashi explains it. So Gemara says, so if you have an ox, the next line of the Gemara, which at first glance is contradictory to the first line of the Gemara, if you have an ox of a chereshot katan that gores, that's the mamidah and apotropos. The court does establish a guardian. And we testify before the guardian about the nature of this ox. Let's say the cheresh gets better, or the shota becomes sane, or the child grows older. Rameir says you can go back to your initial state. The ox can go back. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says Harel b'chazkaso remains in its status; it doesn't go back. Now the Mishnah says, "Sure, it's stadium. This is a stadium ox. Eino chayav misa. Normally, when an ox scores, it's put to death. But in this case, the ox is not put to death, as it says, ki yigach, an ox that gores v'lo she'giguchuhu, but not that an ox that they incited to gore. So this ox was trained to gore. Who are the stadiums? Today is the Daf Yom in the fourth night of Hanukkah. Stadiums are set up by those people who are followers of the Greek and Roman way of life, which is celebrating death in a stadium. So therefore, this is what we're being taught, that the ox is not responsible for its actions. The Gemara, if that happens, but the people who cause it to happen, this is the culture that Hanukkah was fighting against, the culture that would take an innocent ox and turn into a killer. Gemara says, Agufa Kasha. So Gemara says, this is, in fact, an inherent contradiction. The first clause of the Mishnah says, Amr Shor Shal Chereshot V'Katan Shenagach Shor Shal Pikeach Pater. First clause of the Mishnah says, if you have a ox of a Chereshot V'Katan that gores an ox of a sound person, they're exempt. We see we don't collect from a tam animal, from the gufo, because it's metaltal and it's movable objects. But the next clause says, if the ox of the chereshot the cotton gores, Bezdin does appoint a appointed executor, and we do testify before the court. So therefore, we have a contradiction between the first clause and the second clause. First clause says we don't. The second clause says we do. Now we're collecting even from the movable. So Rava says, here's how we explain the contradiction. This is what it means. If the animal is establishing itself that it is a goring ox, ומהוחזקו נגחונן, מעמידו על אפוטרופוס, ומעידים בפני אפוטרופוס, ומשמידו לו מועד. וכי other ונגח, ושלם מעלייה. So that's what it means. It means if we see that it's goring ox, then we're going to establish it. Then we appoint the guardian, and we testify about it 3 times. We establish it as a muad, and then you collect not from the metalto, not from the movables, but from the aliyah. This is how Rashi explains. And we know it's a gore. Not to collect the chatzi nezek, but to make it a muad, because then when it gores again, you collect from the aliyah. Gemara says, okay, from who's going to pay? Me'aliyas man. Who's supposed to pay for the ox that gores? Rabbi Yochanan says, Me'aliyas yisomim. Rabbi Yochanan says, from the estate of the orphans. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina says, Me'aliyas apotropos. No, the guardians themselves have to pay. Gemara says, 1 second, does Rabbi Yochanan really say that the orphans' estate has to pay for the damages done by their estate? Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Asi, Ein iskachal nechse yisomim, Elon came. This Rabbi Yochanan said in another source that you don't go into this state. The court does not go into the assets of the Yisomim to collect anything, even from a contract that their father explicitly wrote. So therefore, we wait, Rashi says, until they grow older, and then we collect it. So therefore, we see from here that Rabbi Yochanan says you don't do it. So why? How come in this source Rabbi Yochanan says you do? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Oashtar Sheyesh Bo Ribis O Ksuvas Isha Mishum Mizoni. So Rabbi Yochanan says. So we see Einis Kachol Yinach so I'm going to call Ribis Ochos. But then Rabbi Yochanan says that you do collect. Rabbi Yochanan says Oashtar Sheyesh Bo Ribis O Ksuvas Isha Mishum Mizoni. So we see in our initial source, Rabbi Yochanan says you collect from the estate of the orphans, whereas in this source, Rabbi Yochanan says you only collect if they have to pay interest to if their father borrowed money from a non-Jew and they have to pay interest, and then they're going to lose money, or if they have to collect, or if the woman's collected from the ksuba, so therefore they have to pay ongoing support until they pay it off, and so therefore, how come here Rabbi Yochanan is saying you go into the estate of the orphans? And in the other source, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that you don't go in, that you only go in to collect interest. So the Gemara says, how do we explain this? How do we explain that Rabbi Yochanan says here you collect from the orphans, but in the other source, Rabbi Yochanan says you don't? Epoch. So we have to reverse Rabbi Yochanan's position. Rabbi Yochanan doesn't say you collect from the orphans. Rabbi Yochanan must say you collect from the estate of the apotropos, from the guardian. So Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, I must say, he must be the one to say you go into the estate of the orphans. Mar says, Amar Rava. So wait, Mishum the Kasha, Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan has an inherent contradiction. What we're going to do is Mashusle Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina Toeh. We're going to reverse Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina's position and says he says you do collect it from the estate of the orphans. Yossi bar Chanina Dayano, he's a judge. He knows the halacha. Why would you put upon him this very harsh teaching? So really, we're not going to reverse the position. Mazik Shani. Rabbi Yochanan says, and if this animal is a goring ox, then we're going to say under these circumstances, you do go into the estate of the orphans to collect it. That's an unusual case. Rabbi Yochanan says, and Rabbi Yochanan says if the animal is a goring ox, you do collect it from the estate of the orphans. The Amras me'aliyas apotropos, and the reason is because if you're going to say you collect it from the estate of the apotropos, then mimani v'lo avdi, then on top of lamatesima base, and what's going to happen is nobody's going to agree to be the guardian of these orphans, and so therefore Rabbi Yochanan says you don't collect it from the estate of the guardians. Whereas Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina says you collect it me'aliyas apotropos. Even when Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina says you do collect it from the estate of the guardians, it doesn't really mean you collect it from the estate of the guardians. It means Choser and Ephraim and Ayisam Chigadli says, yeah, for now you collect it from the guardians, but when they get older, you go collect it back. The guardian can go and seize the money back from the orphans. So now, the Mishnah had said that the court does not appoint a guardian to collect from the ox while it's still a tam. When it's still a tam, it can't collect from the gufo, but it only makes it a guardian in order to make it a muad, the only reason why we testify is to eventually make it a muad so you could collect from the aliyah, from the real estate. So the Gemara says, actually, this is a machokas tanaim, that we have a position that says that actually we do appoint a guardian to collect not only from the muad, but also to collect from the guf of the ox itself, which is a metalton. And that is, whether or not we do that, that's a tanahi. The Tanya, we went to the Bryce, says, Shorshin is charshabah. Let's say you have an ox, its owner was deaf, we have an ox, his owner is not of sound mind, or he's not present. Yehuda ben Nekusa says, Sumchus, that Amar Sumchus, that Sumchus thought, Hareu b'tamuso, that this animal remains in its state of tamus, its state of tam, until the owners come along and they testify in front of the owners. The Chum says, Mamido and apatropasin. Chum say you appoint a guardian, umeidim if they apatropasin. And you testify in front of this guardian. Let's say they do become of sound mind. Yehuda ben Nekusa says the name of Sumchos Chazer or Tamuso. It goes back to its state of Tamus. It goes back to its state of Tamus, and so therefore that it goes back to its state of Tamas, goes back to its initial state until you testify again in front of the owners. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says, it remains in its status. So they tried to analyze this brisa. What does it mean when it says in the first source here that Simcha says that if this animal is gored but its owner was not of sound mind or is not present, that we say Amru Maya Reo Musa de Kamar Simchos. What does Simchos mean when it says it's in its state of Tammuz? If you want to say that under these circumstances that there's no ability to become a muad at all, meaning to say that we don't appoint any executor at all to make it a muad, it can't be. I mean, Tani Seifa Chazar or Tamuso, but the next clause states that if the owners return, it goes back to its state of Tammuz. Miklal Diyayit, so this proves that it did become a muad. Elamai Areo b'Tamuso. What does it mean? It's in its status of being a tam. Areo between Muso Dulum Chasrinole. It means to say that we don't take any money from it. Alma Ema Midin Apotropos Latam Gvos Megufo. Means to say we don't appoint a guardian to collect from the movable objects of the orphans. Some say no, we do appoint a guardian, and we do try to take the guardian to collect from the to make it a muad. So we see that you can, according to the Chachamim, you appoint an animal as you appoint a guardian to even collect from the movable objects of this ox. So the Gemara says, "Sefer b'maikamif." Okay, what's the concluding clause of this brisa? That we had said, Yehuda ben Nekusa says in the name of Simchos, it goes back to its initial state, and the Chachamim say it remains in its state. What's the concluding clause? Rishus mishana ika b'nayo. Whether or not, if the animal changes its status, it goes back to a new owner. Then we're going to say it also changes its status from a muad back to a tam. What would be the reason why we do that? Because maybe it has a new mazel, similarly like the Meiri says, similarly like on Shabbos, the animal is different. Maybe if a new owner, it's a different level of shmira, different mazel. You know, mishanem makom, mishanem mazal. Sometimes you change, and it's a different being. So that's a dispute. So the Gemara says, Sumcha savar rishus mishana. Sumcha says if you change its domain, then it changes its ownership. We're going to say it's no longer muad, it becomes a tam. Rabbi Yossi savar rishus eina mishana. Rabbi Yossi says it doesn't change. So the Gemara says, let's analyze this brisa. Sure, or different brisa, but let's analyze these laws. Let's say you have the ox of a chereshot v'katan that gores. Rabbi Yaakov says, Mishalem chatzi nezek. Rabbi Yaakov Mishalem. The language of the brisa is a little difficult here. Rabbi Yaakov says you pay half damages. So the Gemara says, B'maya skinon. What Rabbi Yaakov Mishalem chatzi nezek? I have to start again. I skipped one. Rabbi Yaakov Mishalem chatzi nezek. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yaakov Mayavidite. What did Rabbi Yaakov do? Why is he paying? So obviously he's not paying. But Rabbi Yaakov Omer Mishalem chatzi nezek. Rabbi Yaakov says you pay half damages if this is the ox of a cherashot of a katan. So the Gemara says, "B'maya skinan." What are we talking about? Everybody says if it's a tam that you pay half damages. And if we're talking about an ox that's a muad, well, first of all, if you want to say if it's a muad, either avdulei shmira, if that he was in fact doing a proper guardianship of it, either avdulei shmira klal klalo, but he shouldn't pay anything, because we're going to say, Rashi says, and then the fence broke at night or robbers broke in, he should be exempt from paying anything. The avid. That if he didn't do a proper guardian, then meaning to say he should have to pay everything. So why does the Brisa say that Rabbi Yaakov is saying half damages? What is the chiddush here? So the Gemara says, I'm a rabbi. No, we're talking about an ox that's a muad. We're talking about a case the ava de shmira pachuta, v'avdei shmira ma'ua. He did a lesser watching, but not a good watching. So and we have to see how does Rabbi Yaakov hold. Rabbi Yaakov several Rabbi Yehuda, the Amar Tzad Thomas ben Komo Medes. He holds like a position of Rabbi Yehuda that says that even when it's a muad, you're still paying for the muad from the initial time, and so therefore you're still paying the initial time because you did a shemira pachuta, and so therefore the time has to pay under those circumstances. But he also combined it with another position of Rabbi Yehuda that says that a muad only needs a shmira pachuta, that tam needs a shmira ma'ua. Tam needs a very good watching, but ironically, counterintuitively, obviously in the Gemara, the muad is only required to have a less shmira. So therefore, under these circumstances, he doesn't have to pay the muad, but he would have to pay the tzad tamas. The several karabanan the amar midin apotropos latam with both mikufo, and he's also in the position that even though it's a tam, you collect from the metaltalin. So Amoy Abaye says velo pligi. So Abaye says, you mean to say under these circumstances, Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda are not arguing. Remember, we said Rabbi Yaakov holds like Rabbi Yehuda. How does he hold like Rabbi Yehuda? He says Sad Thomas ben Komo Medes, and he also holds like Rabbi Yehuda that muad is sagile b'shmira pachuta. You mean to say that he really is not arguing with Rabbi Yehuda? That's what Abaye says. If you have an ox of a cherashot of a katan that gores, Rabbi Yehuda mechayev, the Rabbi Yaakov Omer Chatzi Nezek Kudim. We see that they argue. Rabbi Yehuda says you pay full damage, and Rabbi Yaakov says half. Rabbi Yehuda. Pirish Rabbi Yaakov. No, Rabbi Yaakov is saying this is what Rabbi Yehuda means when he says you're liable. He means you're paying half damages. That's all Rabbi Yaakov is saying. Gemara says, well, Abaye Damar Pligi, according to Abaye, Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda are arguing. In my Pligi, which case are they arguing about? Are they arguing about? There was two possibilities that they could be arguing, or actually three possibilities that we had to in order to establish a position of Rabbi Yaakov. So how are they arguing? We're arguing about the following cases about a muad below natrikal. We're talking about a muad which wasn't guarded at all. The muad wasn't guarded. Rabbi Yaakov said like Rabbi Yehuda b'chada, probably a little bit b'chada. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda in one case, and disagrees with him in the other household. Savak Rabbi Yehuda b'chada. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda in one case. Rabbi Yehuda savar tzad Thomas ben Komo Medes. He says Rabbi Yehuda says there remains a tam that you always pay the tam as well, and so Rabbi Yaakov agrees with that. But he argues with him. He says you appoint the tam to collect from the goof of the ox, and so therefore you pay the full damages. Rabbi Yaakov says you're not collecting from the tam; you're only collecting from the muad side, because you don't collect from the metaltalin of the katan. So so you're only paying the part of the muad. So it makes sense going to Abaye says Rabbi Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda are arguing. Ela Rava Damar Puigi, according to Rava, who says that they're not arguing, that Rabbi Yaakov is just explaining Rabbi Yehuda that pays half damages. The Mukiwa ben Muad, why does he say that they're paying the portion of the Muad? Nukma Batam. Why don't we establish that he's paying the portion of the tam? And we're talking about a case where he did a watching of the ox that wasn't good, and so therefore he has to pay. Either Rabbi Yehuda davoi shmira pakuta, either according to Rabbi Yehuda he did a lesser damaging, and he didn't do a complete watching, and so therefore he paid the damage of the tam. Or either Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov davoi shmira klal, or maybe he didn't watch it at all. Now Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says echatam ve'echamuat shamar shmira pakuta peturin. That if you did a, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says whether it's a tam or muad, if you did a shmir pchuta, you're going to be exempt. And it's coming to teach us that Rabbi Yaakov is saying that maybe it's teaching us that he says you do collect from tam. So the Gemara says no. He says I'd rather put it, Rava says, I'd rather establish that they're arguing about a case where there's two reasons. Meaning to say that when we establish Rabbi Yaakov's position by Muad, there's several chidushim. So therefore he's saying like Rabbi Yehuda with respect to you just need a shmir pakuta, and he agrees with him that you have tzad tamas b'mkomo medes, and he also agrees with him that you appoint an executor to collect from the guf of the minor. But if Rava would say it's by a tam, there would only be one chiddush that you appoint an apotropos for tam. But I wouldn't know that he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, and so therefore I prefer to establish it this way. So the Gemara says, Ravina says, Rishus Mashani Kabaneh. Ravina says the distinction between them is whether or not you could change it when the animal changes Rishus. It changes its status. Could go and have and move in its bakeach hersh and shtapa shota ve'egel hakata. Rabbi Yehuda savar areil b'chatzkas. Rabbi Yehuda says it just remains its status and therefore it pays full damages. Rabbi Yaakov savar rishus mashana. Rabbi Yaakov says no, it changes its status. Okay, we're going to stop here the recording, and God willing, we'll go upstairs now.